Anything else about the beginning of your time together?
How we met. Uh, from what your grandmother's told you, and she told me that her and her sister was going to the Baptist church in Alamo Heights in Texas, right outside part of San Antonio, Texas. And it was about 3 or 4 blocks away. And they were out walking, and they found out that the Methodist church where I went was teaching dancing. So they decided to come over and join and see what the dancing classes were like. So they came over, and I guess Barbara and you both joined the Methodist church after that. And we met, and I tell the story of how we met, but I have to correct it. I tell that I met Edith at a bar. She was down on her knees under the influence of an alcoholic beverage, and I had to help her up, which is a true story. But I've got to clarify it a little bit and say that we met at the communion rail in the Alamo Heights Methodist Church. Reverend Kermit Gibbons was giving the sacrament, which was a mixture of grape juice and wine, and Edith was kneeling, taking that, and I helped her up after she had taken the sacrament. So we met at a bar, and I helped Edith up. That's how we met. And we were quite active in the Methodist Church for several years, and then we finally more or less drifted away from it when we were in the military, and finally joined another church. That's how we met.
Huh. How long was it before you were married?
Well, let's see. I don't remember exactly when we met, but we were married on the 12th of March, 46?
No.
48.
48.
48. I guess we'd been going together about a year and a half. And we were married in the Alamo Heights Methodist Church. And I was in the service, stationed at Lackland Air Force Base as a basic training instructor. And from there we stayed there, and then we started transferring around in the military. A base here and a base there. Wound up in one I spent 1 year in Keflavik, Iceland. And our last assignment was 1965 to 1967 in Bangkok, Thailand, and that's a 2-year tour over there.
After, getting married and all that, what was life like?
Well, your grandmother worked at Summers Drug Store and behind the soda fountain for several years after we were married. Your dad, Gene, was born 2 years after we got married. And then she quit working. From then on, she more or less was a house mother, take care of the kid. She took care of the house, was an excellent cook, and she kept a real nice home, clean. They couldn't ask for a better housekeeper. We stayed after we were married. We married in 48, and then in the fall of 51 we left San Antonio and was stationed out at Parks Air Force Base in California. And from that point on, we started going from this base to the other base and traveled around quite a bit.
Grandmother, in the beginning, in those early days, first few years of marriage.
The only funny thing I remember is the first meal she cooked. she cooked she cooked boiled potatoes, fried pork chops, something else, and gravy and everything. And her menu was good, but she cooked 5 pounds of potatoes and about 8 or 9 pork chops for the two of us. She had been cooking for a big family, taking her turn to cook for a big family, and she decided we would go be a big family. And we ate cold pork chops for a week. I remember that. I don't. A lot of things happened. Funny things happened. I can't probably think of them right now, but I'll think of them later on. Maybe I'll just throw them in later on as we're talking. That's the only one I can remember now.
Tell me about when you got the car from your dad got us that car.
Oh, your first car?
Oh, yeah. Bought us a car. A friend of his was a grocery salesman for IGA, International Grocers Association. Wendell Wilkie was the man's name. I can't think of the company he worked for. Anyway, it was a grocery wholesaler. And he had this car. It was a 1930 Chevrolet. And this was in 49 or 50. And I got it for $100. My dad bought it for me. In fact, I didn't have to pay the $100. And we went to get the thing, and it was setting up on concrete blocks, I remember. We had to jack it up, set it down on the ground. All 4 tires still had air in them. It was good to work. Still had gasoline. It had been up on blocks for 3 or 4 years. And so we hand pushed it out in the alley behind his garage, and he got in his car. We had a 36 Buick, and he got behind that car and started shoving it down there, and it wouldn't start. It wouldn't start. So it had this funny thing over there I'd never seen before in the car. It had a choke, and I pulled that choke out, and Dad said there was a cloud of smoke come out of that thing like he'd never seen before, and it never stopped running from that point on. So it had the old klaxon horn on it, went hooga. You remember those? And it had, in the back seat, it had the little flower things hanging up on the side where you put flowers in, little glass containers. Yeah, the windshield wipers worked. I thought they had the hand operated. No, the windshield wipers worked. But the headlights, everything worked on this car, and it had been up on blocks for about 3 or 4 years. And we drove that thing for a couple of years all over San Antonio. Everybody would wave at us when we went by. But we had fun with that thing. It was a nice car. But I sold it. I sold it for $150. I'd driven around for 2 years and made $50 on it. And I bought a new 49 Plymouth. And we drove that around. And I had a mishap with that one. And we bought another car. And then at that time, 51, we moved to California. So that's our first car.
What can you tell me about the first place you were living in when you were married?
It was a bedroom, living room, kitchen, and bath. And it had a nice screened front porch on it. And I think we paid $25 a month rent for that apartment. It wasn't a bad apartment. It was a nice apartment. It was furnished. We could walk a block and a half to the bus route, and we walked a block to where she worked at the Summers drugstore, where Dad worked, and we got tired of living there, and we moved to another place down the street. And then a friend of My dad's had a place over owned by the captain of the fire engine number 9 in the San Antonio Fire Department, and we had they had a nice 3-apartment building, which had a bathroom, a bedroom, a living room, a dining room, and a nice little porch. And we lived there until we moved to California. So that's the first part.
Can you tell me where your families were living relative to?
Okay, both of our families, when we were married, were living in San Antonio. We moved. My mother and dad moved to San Antonio, Texas, in '45, and I moved to Texas in 1944 and went to a military school. And my dad had a disease, he said. I don't believe him, never did, but he said the doctor told him he had to be somewhere on the Edwards Plateau, which San Antonio is on the eastern point of the Edwards Plateau. And he moved down there. I never have been able to figure it out because in 1911, my dad's brother disappeared, and nobody knew where he was. In 1941, July of '41, we found him, and guess where he lived?
Where?
San Antonio, Texas. So when we went down to visit him, and we come back and couldn't do anything during the war. And then I went to military school in '44 in San Antonio, and my dad come up with the Edwards Plateau deal so he could get down there and be with his brother. And my mother was not too happy about that maneuver, I guarantee you. But she went along with it.
Why wasn't she happy about it?
Well, we lived on a farm, and
Ohio.
in Ohio. And her home in Ohio was a big kitchen, a big formal dining room, a big living room, a full basement under the house, and 4 bedrooms and a 5 bedrooms upstairs and 1 bath. And that's where she moved down to a house in San Antonio. Was a little bit bigger than her former living room in Ohio. And she was not happy. But she put up with it reluctantly, but that was it.
So she was unhappy with their move because
Yeah.
she meant she needed to move
But she
to
was.
a much smaller house.
Oh yeah. You got to remember, this is all happening during the Depression.
Mm.
And we had a basement
Ohio.
in Ohio, and in that basement there was a solid concrete fruit cellar. And that fruit cellar was probably 10 foot wide and 12 foot tall and 25 foot long. And that was all in there with shelves where we worked all summer in the garden canning stuff to put it up in there so during the winter we had a food supply. And Mom moved down there to Texas and had absolutely nothing to do. No garden or no nothing to do. So she was not too happy, which I don't much blame her.
Mm.
So
Can you think of any questions, Dad, that might cover anything that hasn't been talked about that you might know about?
No, I think that those are good
Cover it?
discussions. Yeah.
All right, now we're going to get grandmother's side of the story. what you were doing in your life when you guys first met?
When we first met,
Yeah.
well, want me to start?
Yeah.
Well, when we first met, I was working no, I was still in high school and still in school when we met. I think I had just graduated from high school when we met. And he told you how we met, so you've got that on tape.
Yeah. What do you remember about that?
Well, I don't know. My sister and I heard that they were teaching dancing or having dancing in the Methodist church, which was just across the street from the Baptist church where our family attended. And they didn't believe in dancing in the Baptist church, you know. So we snuck over there to the Methodist church. And that's where I met him. I think I should have stayed a Baptist. But anyway, that's all water under the bridge. But we dated, I guess, for, about a year, I guess, until we were married. And I remember when we were getting the church ready for our wedding, I had gotten my hair done and so forth, and we passed the church, and his dad's car was parked out in front of the church where we were going to be married, and I thought, what is he up to now? I thought he was going to try and change everything, you know, that we decided to do for the wedding, but he didn't. But he was quite a character. So we dated, I guess, about 6-8 months, didn't we, Lester? Before we got engaged. And then my mother and dad liked him. You know, they of course, that was getting rid of another kid out of the house, I guess, since there was 5 of us living at home at the time. But it turned out all right, you know, all these years. My hair is white now, and I can't remember my name half the time, but that's the way it is. But no, I was born in Houston, Texas, on January the 19th, 1929, and I was a preemie baby. I only weighed 2 pounds when I was born. My mother was out, from what they tell us, my mother was out doing laundry, hanging her clothes out on the line, and she went into labor. And she had me before the doctor could get there. And he said, that baby can't possibly live. She only weighs 2 pounds. My mother said, oh, yes, she can. And here I am. All these years later, I made it. But my mother had a friend called Bertha that she had met, and they were very close, like sisters. And they had a family too, but the 2 families were very close. And when we, let's see, what was I going to say? Wait a minute. But
About.
tell me something you want to know.
Well, one thing, you just reminded me of something that I always remember you telling me
What?
about when you were born.
Uh-huh.
You were so small.
Oh, yeah.
With your hand.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I was so little, and my mother made diapers. She had to cut the regular size diapers into 4s to fit me. And it was cold in January. And so back in those days, we had the stoves, and it had the ovens, you know, the stoves had tall legs. And my mother would put me underneath there in the basket and open the oven door to keep me warm. Yeah. And they used to feed me with an eyedropper, a drop at a time, so I wouldn't choke. So, but it turned out all right because I'm still around here. But
I remember you telling me once that your wrist was the size of like her wedding ring.
Mm-hmm. Just about. A little bit bigger than that. And my mother made diapers for me. She took a regular sized diaper and she got 6 diapers out of 1 for me. So I must have really been. I don't have any baby pictures. I guess I would have broken the camera or something.
Yeah. Weren't you born on leap year?
Hmm?
Weren't you born on leap year?
I don't know.
Leap year day?
1929. I don't know if it was a leap year or not. But
That's what I remember.
yeah.
You always used to joke about how young you really were because you really only had a birthday every 4 years or something like that. Is that right?
I don't remember
Am I
that.
remembering that right, Dad? Is that someone else? Am I mixing
That's
you
No, it
up?
must have been somebody else.
You're
Yeah.
not born on leap year?
No, she's been born on February the
No.
29th. And she was born on January the 19th.
1929. Yeah.
Huh.
My dad worked
Caused
for
a
the.
stock market crash.
Yeah, I caused the stock
Oh,
market
stock
crash.
market
But my dad worked for the Howard Hughes Tool Company in Houston, Texas at that time. He wasn't on active duty then. He was in reserve. And
Around the time you were born?
yeah, and so he was a first aid man for the Howard Hughes owned a company. And so he worked there for quite a while. And then he, let's see, what did we do then? This was when I was a little thing.
He moved to San Antonio and he went on active duty.
Yeah, when we moved to San Antonio, where I met Lester, my dad had been called into the military. He was in reserve for years, and he was called on active duty, and that's why we were in San Antonio at the time.
So where was your family living?
We were living on Eleanor Street in San Antonio. About you could walk to the Fort Sam Houston, which was the base where Daddy was stationed. You could walk there from where we lived, just up the hill a little ways. We didn't live on base, but we had a house there. And we had a big backyard, and of course I had 4 brothers and sisters too at that time. And my brother Dexter used to like to, he was typical boy. He played all sorts of sports. And my brother Philip, who's he's the baby of the family. He was a kind that liked to work in flowers, planting flowers and doing landscaping and stuff like that. But, well, let's see what else.
Where was that church? Where the church that you guys met at?
At the
where
Alamo
is it?
Heights Methodist Church in San Antonio,
Where is it?
Texas. Yeah.
Where was it? Close by where
Yeah,
you both-
we could walk to church from where we lived. It was a long walk, but we could.
Because that was a long walk.
Yeah, but we used to walk to church and back, Lester and I. But I don't know. Kermit Gibbons was the minister that married us, and getting ready for the wedding, I had come back from the beauty shop the day we were going to get married that night, and his car was parked out in front of the church, and I said to my mother, "Wonder what he's doing over there. He don't have any business at the church." He was in there. I said, "If he's touching anything and changing the arrangements, I'm going to kill him." But anyway, he didn't. But
How do you remember how it was arranged?
how the
Do
church
you remember
was?
how it all looked? And
Oh, it was really pretty. Yeah, we had flowers up on the altar, and we didn't go to a big expense. I remember I had on a navy blue suit with a white blouse underneath it, and navy blue hose. Back then, your hose were the same. You know, if you were going to be in style. So I had navy blue shoes and navy blue hose and navy blue suit. I did get married in a white. I could have, but I didn't. Okay.
What do you remember about the first few years of life? with
First
your-
few years after we were married, well, we rented a little apartment. I can't remember what street it was in San Antonio.
Erie.
On Erie Avenue, Lester said. And it was a small apartment, but it had an old stove in it that stood on tall legs like the old ones used to, with a high oven next to it. And yeah, first meal I cooked, Lester said, "My gosh, well, you're cooking for an army," because before I was married, my sisters and I always had to take turns cooking supper for the family, so we'd learn how to cook. And I cooked enough for an army. He said, "We got company coming," and I said, "No." I remember, what was it, meatloaf, I think, and baked potatoes.
Pork chops,
Huh?
boiled potatoes and gravy.
But anyway, it was a big meal. I think we ate off of it for 2 days, so we wouldn't waste it. But I was working in a drugstore where my dad was a druggist at the time, but I worked behind the soda fountain. And let's see, I think I made $18 a week. Yeah, I made $18 a week, didn't I, Lester? No.
Made $25.
I made $25 a week. That's right. That was a lot of money back then, $25 a week. We used to get some real characters in there at the drugstore. You got to where you knew everybody, you know, and that would come in there regularly. And I could walk to work from the apartment. We were only about 3 blocks from where I worked, weren't we, Lester?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I didn't have to drive. Of course, I couldn't drive then. I didn't know how, but it was interesting. We moved a couple of times from that first apartment. It was a small one, the one we rented when we got married. Just had a small kitchen and a little tiny bathroom and 1 bedroom and living room. That was it. No garage, but it didn't matter because we didn't have a car anyway. So
I'm interested to know about some of the characters.
Hmm?
You mentioned there were some real interesting characters that used to come into the
Oh,
drugstore.
yeah.
Can you
This
tell me
man
about-
used to come in for breakfast every morning, and he always had the same menu. One time he was complaining about the food, about the way it was cooked, and I said, "All right." And my dad was off that day. He's a pharmacist. He was off that day, so
Sorry,
I said to
could you start over?
huh?
Could you my recording just stopped on me.
Oh,
Can you tell me again about that strange, funny character?
oh
used to
that
come in?
character. He used to come in there for breakfast every morning when I was working, and he always had the same thing. One day he was complaining about he didn't like the way I cooked it, and I said, "All right, you just come back here and cook it yourself," and he did. But you get to where you know all the people that come in there regularly, you know, and you joke around with them and stuff, and I enjoyed working there. But and I could walk to work from where our apartment was. It was only like 3 blocks, so I didn't need any transportation, you know. But
Do you remember the first car you got?
the first car,
Yeah. You said you didn't have a car at that point, but
No.
you remember when you guys did first get
I remember when he brought that thing home, and I thought, I'm not going to ride in that. It was black, I think, if I remember right. But and when the horn honked, it'd go ooga, ooga, and embarrass the heck out of it. But anyway, it was transportation, so yeah, he was stationed at Lackland at the time, Lackland Air Force Base. And I remember one time we went to the NCO club. Remember that? And we were kind of drinking then. We were coming home and it was raining, and we had that old car, and the windshield wipers were going, and I was just singing up a storm coming home. That was something else.
You remember what you were singing?
Yeah, we were really.
What were you singing?
Huh?
Do you remember what you were singing?
No, I don't remember what I was singing. Probably some silly song, but knowing me, it probably was. So
So I'm really curious if you remember going back to the funny experience you had at the first meal you cooked for you and Granddad.
the first what?
The first meal that you
Oh
cooked.
yeah.
You said you cooked for an army.
Oh yeah.
Do you remember what his response was?
He said, "Who's coming to dinner?" And I said, "Nobody. It's just you and me." And he said, "Well, you cooked enough for an army," so we ate on it for about 3 days. Yeah, that was something else. But what my stepmother did was she used to have, there were 3 of us girls, and she used to have us take turns. One night a week I had to cook supper, and my sister did, and so forth. And that's how I learned to cook, that way. But when you cut it down from all the people we were cooking for at home, and then you get married and it's just the 2 of you, it's kind of hard to change the recipes, you know. Oh me. Yeah. That was something else.
Can you think of any other funny stories
Mm.
or interesting experiences you had meeting Granddad, or when you guys were first living together, first married, or after that point? Can you think of anything that kind of stands out, or or anything about your house?
Well,
or-
he wasn't there when Gene was born. He was. I'd gone to the hospital. My stepmother took me to the hospital, and I was in labor, and he was working. He was working at the going out to the brewery. Somebody had drowned, and that's where he was. And
the San Antonio Fire Emergency
yeah,
Corps.
at where?
San Antonio Fire Emergency Corps.
Yeah, and they were out fishing somebody out that had gotten drunk and drowned. And he wasn't there at the hospital, but then it wouldn't have done him any good anyway, because he couldn't have done anything anyway.
Tell him how much it costs to have Gene at the hospital.
Oh yeah, and the bill for your father was what, $1.50 a day?
$3.25.
$2.20. Huh?
$3.25.
$3.25.
$3.25 a day is what it cost, and I was in the hospital for about 4 days with him. So he was a cheap baby. I got him in the bargain basement. Oh gee. And I remember when he was born, I said, well, what did I have? And the doctor said, you had a great big baby boy. He weighed 8'15" and a half. And he's 21 and a half inches long. Your father was. Yeah.
Do you remember how long it was after you guys got married that he was born?
That he was born? Well, let's see. We were married on the 12th of March, 1949, 48, and he was born on the 20th of May, 1950. So a couple of years, but yeah. And Gene slept in Lester's baby bed that his mother had saved it all those years for the first one, and he slept in that. He was a good baby, though. He didn't give us any trouble. But what are you laughing about? I remember when we were stationed in California. Gene was about 3 years old when we went out there, and he had this little tricycle he liked, and we lived on right off of a busy street.
El Camino Real.
Yeah, El Camino Real in Santa Clara,
San
Jose, California, and I'd put a harness on Gene and tie a long rope to it so he couldn't run away. And he'd sit in the front yard and play, and people would walk by and they'd say, oh my goodness, here, let me untie you. And Gene said, don't untie me, my mama tied me here. One day the rope broke and he took off on his tricycle.
He pulled a bush out of the ground.
Yeah, he pulled a bush out of his rope was tied to a bush. And he pulled the bush out. It had been raining the day before, and the ground was still wet. And he disappeared, and I followed the bush he pulled up while he was pedaling around the corner on his tricycle. Yeah, I remember that really, really. Don't you untie me, my mama tied me here. Oh boy. But his mother and dad. His mother was very, very demanding. She was a nice lady, but she just always wanted her way. And we'd get transferred, and they'd say when we were transferred from Texas to California, I guess Gene was about 3 or 4 years old, 3 years old, I guess. And his folks always wanted to know where we were going to go, when we got transferred. And as soon as you get there and find a place, you call us and let us know. And boy, they were out there in 2 days. We hadn't even finished unpacking when his folks got there. Oh yeah, Gene was his grandmother's apple of her eye. She really was. Well, he was an only child, so this was their only grandchild. See, but she'd call me up and say, what are you going to cook today? Well, and I'd tell her, and she said, no, don't cook that. Cook such and such. Cook something else. Oh. She was a nice lady, but she didn't like me because I took her little boy away from her. But
Think of any other questions, Dad? Anything that hasn't been covered?
No, I don't think so.
well, that's right.
good start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To be continued.
Huh?
To be continued.
To be continued.
Until next time.
Okay.